things, with the last chapter in Muckle, González, and Camp being the one of sustainability. Now, they have said that sustainability has been like food, running all the way through the textbook. But this is a standalone sustainability chapter, Anthropology and Sustainability, which I think is a good way to end the textbook. Better than people used to end their textbooks before. It makes sense. And I would like to frame this in terms of course, the chapter is called Anthropology and Sustainability, and so we're not doing biologists or other disciplines that we could apply to this. And so I'd like to frame this as part of the history of how anthropology emerged as a discipline. And we talked about, it hasn't been that long, about 150 years ago, when people believed in all kinds of things that were just wrong. But one of the things that the anthropologists had encountered was the idea that the people in Europe and in the United States, had figured out the way to be productive, and that people in other parts of the world didn't know how to use the land, didn't know how to do things that would be efficient and productive. And so we're going to go over and start plowing things up and using tractors and all these things. And so, like I said, it would be that at best, they had not figured out how to do things efficiently. And at worst, it was that they didn't have a system at all, that they were simply in a kind of backwards or stupid state. Another idea that people had, and this came out a little bit later in the 1960s, although it's really just kind of a distillation of a stereotype, which is called the tragedy of the commons. And so the idea here, oversimplifying, but I think in some ways it's like I said, a stereotype anyway, which has been distilled into a pretty common idea, which is that if people who have land in common, or resources are shared in common, like fishing grounds or fishing territories, that your individual incentive will always be to take a little bit more. So if I just put one more cow out into the common pasture, or if I just fish one more big fish out of the common fishing grounds. And so if each individual's incentive is to take a little bit more, even though that doesn't seem to affect the bigger picture, and when you add it all up, it will just become a wasteland, because everybody will want to put in one more cow, and then it'll be overgrazed, and everybody will want to take one more fish, and so the fish will all be gone. And so this was called The Tragedy of the Commons by Garrett Hardin. And the idea was, well, if we just privatize all these things, if we make sure they're individually owned and regulated by a market, then people will make more. They won't overuse it because they'll have to protect it because it will be privatized. Now, into this march the anthropologists, and really, as we've been talking about, one of the things that anthropology most did was to document how people had knowledge, skills, systems, ideas about the world, which were actually interesting and sustainable. And in contrast, the idea that everyone was simply throwing in one more cow or fishing out one more fish, that there were social agreements, that people would actually talk to each other and come to an agreement about how land or water or other resources that are held in common should be socially distributed. And so it is not just the case that everyone is running around willy-nilly making individual decisions about resources. People are actually talking about these things. And because we live in a society, they are making social choices about those. So on the one hand, anthropology was talking back to the ideas from places that other people didn't know how to manage their stuff. But crucially, even though anthropologists were documenting the skills and the social agreements of others, I think anthropologists, people in the West, and many people in indigenous or native communities themselves thought that these kinds of customs and traditions were going away, that they were, maybe they weren't bad, but they were not as efficient or productive as doing things like mining or intensive agriculture. And so the traditional ideas, while they may have had some use in the past, they were about to go away. And this led to some what was called in anthropology salvage anthropology, or salvage ethnography, in which people were trying to talk to people and get their knowledge and extract it before it all disappeared. So this is kind of what was being done for the last 100 years or so in anthropology. Only fast forward to basically today, I guess I should say, 100 years, 150 years after anthropology came to be, we certainly see that a lot of things have disappeared. It's not the same as it was. But probably to the surprise of many anthropologists, and maybe even to the surprise of many people who are who identify as indigenous or native, there's been much that has been revived or recovered. There's a lot of persistence. There is a lot of creative response, and a lot of the people that were thought to be going away have not gone away. Now, certainly, that's not to say that things haven't happened that are not the best, but people are creative and persistent and turn out to be doing good things. And what turns out to be inefficient in many cases, or just dumb, is the idea that you're going to extract resources out of the land or the ground or a fishing area for profit. That turns out to be the thing, privatized extraction, which overuses resources, and in many cases leaves us with these really degraded environmental situations in which people have gone in, and we talked about Papua New Guinea being a place of gold mining and resource extraction, which basically takes the gold out and leaves you with a bunch of chemicals and a not great landscape, or places in which plantation agriculture was once prominent, like growing sugarcane in what is now Haiti, or industrial wastelands, which some of us know from living in various parts of upstate New York, places where people tried to put in industries and polluted the rivers or the water or the land around us. So, it's not to say that there haven't been good things that have come from these kinds of profit mechanism exploits, but in many cases, it's left people in a kind of degraded environmental situation. And whatever we may believe about our productive system, it doesn't seem to be sustainable for the long term. It doesn't seem like it's going to be a good idea to just keep ramping up the production of stuff and the use of the use of factory farming and giving everybody a car does not seem to be a good idea for the planet. Again, could be wrong, but it doesn't seem to be working out in terms of our planetary climate change. Now, the idea of sustainability, Muckle, González, and Camp borrow a framework which is kind of neat from this emerged from the Rio de Janeiro summit, which sees that there are three pillars of sustainability. We usually think of the environmental one when we think about sustainability, but there's also social sustainability and economic sustainability. So being able to work at the intersection of these three areas is important, because you can't just think about protecting the environment. There's also people's social lives, cultural systems, as well as being able to earn a living, to actually have a good life economically, which can mean different things, but is generally shared in terms of having access to basic resources. One of the things that is kind of a sub-theme in a couple different places, but I'd like to bring it out in this chapter, is water. And of course, the textbook has been talking about food throughout and sustainability throughout, but I'd like to just bring out water here, because it goes back to something that we read about a bit ago in the political, I think it was at the beginning of this unit 4 of there was a chapter on political organization and political power. And in that, there's a little section which I think actually belongs better in this sustainability chapter, which is about environmental inequality in terms of having to access water. And as they discuss in this section, this is often the job of young women, girls, who have to travel in many cases for miles and hours to get access to water. And so it's also a gender equality issue. And here they mention in this chapter, they say, which is kind of still to me astounding, but important to keep in mind, that in terms of the greatest environmental cause of human sickness and even death, it is contaminated water. And so this is going to be an issue that we have to think about as we go forward. Now, I guess I want to just again emphasize that having access to these kinds of basic resources like clean water, food, housing, healthcare is the best way to limit population, if that is in your interest. That is to say, some people get into a weird mode where they're like, okay, well, the world's overpopulated, so some people are going to have to die anyway. So, contaminated water, who cares? And I'm being crass here, but the problem with that attitude is that if people are through lack of basic resources, getting sick or dying at an early age, then people are going to need more labor, and they're going to want to replace those people. And so what has shown to be effective time after time after time is not necessarily providing access to things like birth control, although that's very important. But if people have access to all the things that they need, food, water, they don't feel the need or there's more emphasis to invest in each of their children and less need to have what we might call more children, because some of them they believe are going to die prematurely. And so in every case in which people's standard of living has been increased, there's been actually a drop in the population growth if people are able to do that. This is also the issue of water is something that has political consequences as well. Muckle, González, and Camp discuss the Standing Rock protests and the Dakota Access Pipeline, which was a very prominent national protest a couple of years ago. And the issue of how pipelines are routed and through whose land these things are not going to go away. And it reminds us of how important it is to be paying attention to indigenous issues and native peoples in this time. At the end of this, or in this chapter, Muckle, González, and Camp, again, this is called Anthropology and Sustainability. And so what can anthropology do? And one of the things they mention here is that a lot of the things that we're seen as, oh, we're getting those old ideas and the skills and the knowledge of people actually becomes useful or becomes important as what is called traditional ecological knowledge. That is to say that it is something which can then be applied or used in a particular situation in order to increase the sustainability of life, which is related to the idea of what is called ethnoecology, which I'll just summarize as, again, the people who were once thought to be inefficient or going away, or that they were all going to be replaced by tractors, actually may have much to tell us about how to live in these environments because they've been doing it for hundreds or thousands of years. And the idea of being this long-term approach of anthropology, I think, is actually uniquely suited to what we may need to do in the future. So I guess in my own head, sometimes I think that anthropology is too big of a discipline. It says it's all about human beings and that we're going to combine biological stuff and evolution together with archaeology and culture. It seems too enormous, but actually it turns out that may be exactly what we need in terms of understanding long-term trends, long-term sustainability through archaeology, the biological effects of different climates and different resource use patterns, and of course, how to translate and express all these ideas in language and through cultural change. Now, I am perhaps not as up on the wonderful things that other anthropology professors are doing in colleges and all those places, but you know, it's good to see that people are doing different things out there. They mention here the work of Margaret Mead, who is perhaps the most famous anthropologist in the United States, or was, and so this is something that the last article we'll read for Friday is, I'll send you the link, called Margaret Mead Imagined Different Futures. So we get a tiny preview of it in the last part of this chapter.